in my opinion, this is the definition of impact, and it also goes to show that with a little creativity and passion, we can solve so much for the world.
And there are many more problems left to solve. Speaking of, we'd like to invite Build Lab Program Director of Social Entrepreneurship, Katie Quigley-Malore, to the stage for a special announcement. Welcome, Katie.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? Hi. It is my absolute honor to announce the BU Changemaker Challenge this year. The BU Changemaker Challenge is a competition here on the BU campus where we ask teams of students to engage with a pressing social issue. And this year's topic could not be more urgent. We are exploring how do we better welcome migrants and refugees to the greater Boston area. We are hearing from our partners and people doing the work that the systems are overwhelmed and that it really is about who you know, who you are referred to, that dictates your entire experience with the process. And so if you were inspired today, if you develop new skills and you want to apply them, please take out your phone. Please scan this QR code right now and sign up for our newsletter. And stay tuned because our applications open on March 1st. We hope you'll join us in creating a real impact and bring your empathy and creativity and curiosity to the table and make a real difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katie. Next up, we'd like to invite Entrepreneur in Residence, Justin Kang. Justin, yes. Justin is the co-founder of Visible Hands, which helps early stage founders, especially those from diverse backgrounds, unlock their next level of growth through programming, support, and venture capital investments. Please join me again in welcoming Justin.
Hello, thank you. Good afternoon. All right. Can we say thank you to the Build Lab for a great day today, if we can give them a round of applause. I am honored to be here today. I am currently the innovator in residence at the Build Lab, so feel free to reach out to me whenever, however, especially if you're building a company. Today we have a special guest coming from San Francisco, and I have the pleasure to interview her momentarily. But first, she'll be giving us a presentation. So let me introduce you to Anarghya Vardhana, who is a partner at Maveron, which is a consumer-only venture capital firm with over $1 billion in assets under management. She spends her time understanding consumer and cultural behavioral shifts, identifying billion-dollar businesses that will emerge, and partnering with the right founders to help grow those startups to iconic consumer brands. Some of the topics that she has invested in range from mental health, women's health, rare disease, healthcare platforms, and connection and community for wellness. Now, prior to joining 7 years ago to Maveron, Anarghya was a seed investor and product manager at several startups, notably Medable in the healthcare space. She actually began her career in Google and has been in the Bay Area tech scene since studying at Stanford, where she studied science, technology, and society, graduating with honors and a focus of human biology and mathematics. Not only that, she is Forbes 30 Under 30 for venture capital, won the Diversity Champion Awards from Forbes and JPMorgan Chase, has gathered other accolades during her time at Google. She is now a Kauffman Fellow and an active participant in All Raise and other diversity initiatives to change the landscape in technology and innovation. She hails from the Pacific Northwest, Oregon. She runs many marathons, slowly, she says. 6 so far from what I learned, and she's also a classical dancer. So let's welcome her to the stage.
Hello, good afternoon. I am no longer under 30, so I've got to retire that one. So I didn't grow up thinking of my family as entrepreneurial. In fact, I thought of them as risk-averse and focused on stability and consistency. I'm an immigrant myself. Any other immigrants in the audience? Great. And my parents are also immigrants. We moved to the US shortly after my 2nd birthday, coming to Oregon from southwestern India. And the consistent message at home was to get a great education and get a stable, steady job. My family happened to be technology and engineering oriented, So I was exposed to science and math from an early age with my family's expectation that stability flowed from these fields. But others in my community had very similar messages from their parents in similarly stable, steady fields like being a doctor, being a teacher, being a lawyer, whatever it may be. I also didn't grow up with a business-minded orientation. I didn't have a lawn mowing business, I didn't sell lemonade, I didn't even sell Cutco knives. All this further instilled in me that I was not entrepreneurial, not business-minded, and that I was in fact very far from the world of entrepreneurship. So, I didn't start college thinking about entrepreneurship or business or startups, none of that stuff. I thought I had a path planned, a path to something steady, but things don't always pan out as we think they will be. I studied an interdisciplinary major at Stanford called Science, Technology, and Society, like Justin mentioned. Essentially, it's an area of study that looks at the intersection of science, technology, and society, how they are dependent on each other, impact each other, and evolve together. Honestly, it's a perfect area of study for what I do today, which is understanding how technology-based companies impact regular American consumers. However, I will say that my journey to my area of study was not at all straightforward. I thought I wanted to major in math and become a math professor. I was quickly dissuaded from that after my first linear algebra midterm. I then thought I wanted to be a doctor and went along with the flock of thousands of other pre-med students and took the HumBio core, the human biology core curriculum. I learned then that I am too squeamish to even put a Band-Aid on a paper cut, so did not want to look at people's organs, and that dream was also squashed. I was actually quite demoralized and concerned that everyone seemed to know what their future was going to hold, seemed to have their path to that stable, steady career and job, that they knew what they were going to do, or so it seemed. My mind was entirely focused on finding that stable technology or science-oriented career or job. But what to study in order to get there kept evading me. Until I stumbled upon this interdisciplinary major that I ended up graduating from with honors. I tell you this story because I worry that there is a perception that everyone going into entrepreneurship knew exactly what they wanted to do from day one. That they studied engineering in school or an equivalent entrepreneurship major, that they were the president of the startup club or ran the VC club. I was none of these things, and in fact, barely knew what any of these things was. After graduating from Stanford, I started a job at Google. And I remember that as soon as I got my Google offer, I called my dad, I tell him, hey, I got a job offer from Google. And the first thing he said was, I am so excited for you to spend the next 30 years of your career at Google, which is what he did at his job at Intel Corporation as a software engineer. So needless to say, he was completely shook when I left after 3 years. I loved Google. Let me tell you why I left. I started there in 2010 when Google was at the height of defining technology and the world around us. Larry Page, one of the founders, had just come back as CEO. Innovation was bleeding out of the walls of this company, and it was a really exciting place to work, especially if you were a young person wanting to make your mark in the world of technology. I learned a lot. I worked with amazing people. But I saw my peers from school, other friends, working at startups and learning, completing projects, making an impact on their organizations at a pace that I could honestly only dream of. What they learned and did in 3 weeks, I did in maybe 3 quarters or more. There was a saying we had at Google, which was about certain teams being a startup within the big company. We'd say, oh, we are a startup within Google. Let me tell you, having been on now both sides of the table, it's not the same. The dictionary definition of entrepreneurship says the process of developing, organizing, and running a new business to generate profit while taking on risk. The key word there is taking on risk. Working in a team within Google, where if the team or product fails, you have the massive backing of Google. You can move on to another team, another project, which significantly and effectively reduces the amount of risk by a large amount. So yes, you may be working on a small initiative within a bigger company, but without the risk, it's not true entrepreneurship. I wanted true entrepreneurship. Why? Because I saw the speed at which my peers at startups were learning and the seemingly immediate impact they were having on their organizations. I wanted my day-to-day work to matter more than it seemed to at Google. So, without knowing much about startups and only seeing that world through media and through the eyes of my friends, I took a leap, I applied to a few startup companies, and got my first startup job. I joined as a product manager at a 10-person fintech or financial technology company. It was VC or venture capital funded, it was ambitious, it was ready to take on the world and make a huge impact. And wow, was it different. There is a huge difference between executing on a plan that someone else gives you versus coming up with the plan yourself. I was suddenly thrown into a situation with no plan, no roadmap, and no template to even figure out the plan or the roadmap. It was mine to define and build. The opportunity was amazing, but it was also very intimidating. No one tells you how comforting it is to do something someone else tells you. While starting with a blank canvas is liberating, it's also intimidating and can be crippling. Suddenly, I was in the mix of not just figuring out how to put together a product process, but also trying to help us pick the company's healthcare option, or whether we would do a 401k or not. That decision was on me, or what the lunch budget should be for free lunch once a week. The company was small, so I was involved in decisions top to bottom. It was a lot. Doing this, I thought back to my parents. My parents moved to America. It wasn't too different from me in this startup. Let me tell you how. They were figuring things out from scratch. My parents were actually trailblazers. They also had no template. No one handed them an apartment. No one gave them a car. No one helped them figure out insurance, a bank account, nothing. They came to this country with some cash, their clothes, a few pots and pans, and figured out the rest. Step by step, block by block, they assumed the risk and they turned it into magic. Fast forward to this first startup I joined, melting down and going out of business. Why? We had brilliant people, lots of money, a great idea, but what we lacked was something I had spent my whole life thinking was a weakness. At an organizational level, we lacked emotional intelligence, empathy, trust, the things that it takes to build a productive and effective company. I'll give you an example. There was a lack of trust between the engineers, so multiple people would be working on the same thing, trying to one-up the person next to them. We wasted time. We lacked teamwork. We lacked collaboration. Plainly put, we had a toxic culture. It got the best of us, and we crumbled. Now, a survey. How many of you have been told you're too sensitive? Show of hands. Okay. Or that you lead with your heart? Show of hands. Okay. I've been told this ad nauseum. And this accusation is often gendered. Sensitivity and being in touch with one's feelings is considered a more feminine thing, and guess what? That's not doing anyone of any genders any favors. I had been taught sexist notions around women being more sensitive, and that was a bad thing, and that men were logical and scientific and all this stuff. That men use their brains while women use their hearts. And I'd been taught to think that my emotional intelligence, or what they called sensitivity, was a weakness. That it could get in the way of my intellect. My first, biggest, and lasting lesson, having been in the startup and entrepreneurship world, is that while the intellect may get you started with the business, it's the soft skills, so the emotional intelligence, that allows you to keep going. These skills are your ability to hire and inspire, motivate, create a transparent and trusting culture, grit, the willingness to make tough decisions with a clear head. These things can completely make or break your success as an entrepreneur. And at that first startup I went to, we didn't have that, so we broke. But I am so grateful for that lesson because I have since then carried it with me forever. It has also helped me reframe things that felt so inherent to me and didn't feel valuable, seem like a gift and an asset. Fast forward. I am sitting in an audience like you, in an auditorium in Portland, Oregon, where I grew up, where my parents are being honored for their 25 years of service to the Indian community in Portland. Yes. Thank you. I myself was exiting a failing, melting down startup. I was thinking through what's next, worrying that maybe the entrepreneurial world wasn't for me, worrying that I didn't grow up with that environment. It wasn't in my blood, it wasn't in my DNA. And here were my parents on stage, proudly standing after having immigrated here 30 years ago, being recognized by the community for helping build it, shape it, cultivate it, having taken on enormous risk to create something out of nothing. They were and are entrepreneurs. This got me thinking, maybe there are different ways of being an entrepreneur. Maybe there are different definitions of entrepreneurship. Maybe there is a breadth of entrepreneurship that I've been missing. And maybe there are different ways to be a part of this entrepreneurial ecosystem. Silicon Valley and tech in general, while very deeply rooted in innovation, has a limited view of entrepreneurship. And that view is often young, white, male. My parents were none of these things, and neither am I. And because the view is so limited, the skills and characteristics that Silicon Valley applauds are often those largely attributed to these young white men. I do want to take a step back here and think through the term risk that I mentioned before, and give a slightly more expansive view of that as well. Most importantly, I want to highlight that what risk is really varies from person to person, from circumstance to circumstance. Risk is different if you have children to support. Risk is different if you have a wealthy family and you can fall back on them if things don't go well. Unfortunately, this nuance of risk is not always addressed either, which I think contributes to a very limiting view of what entrepreneurship really is. This new view of entrepreneurship got me excited. It got me thinking about the expansiveness of entrepreneurship and what role I could play in it. I was lucky enough then to learn about venture capital as a field. I had no idea what the VC space was before then. Even in college, I didn't really know what VCs were, but through my first startup, I learned a little bit about venture capital. How many of you, show of hands, know what VCs are or what we do? Okay, many of you. I'll give you a quick definition for those who may not. What is VC? Think of us like a bank that give individuals and teams money to start and grow companies. In return, we get to own a chunk of the company. So we buy ownership into the company with our capital. Where do we get money from? Well, large institutions like endowments and big hospital systems invest their money in us and trust us to drive them big returns. They understand that venture capital is a risky business, it's a risky asset class, but you can drive really big returns, although there's a risk of also going to zero. But that's the part of the dynamic in VC investing. What I learned about VC in my early days was that very few venture capital dollars go to women-led companies. Single-digit percentage of the total dollars. And that number is even smaller for women of color. I was naively shocked by this, but I wondered if I could help change those numbers by sitting on the other side of the table. So I took my shot. Through meeting lots of people and a number of different interview processes, I joined Maveron, where I'm a general partner today. I joined in 2015, so a little over 7 years ago, as a senior associate, the junior most role, and I'm today one of the 3 general partners running the fund. What do? We invest in early-stage consumer-facing tech companies. 2 decades ago, so before my time, Maveron invested in OG.com internet businesses like eBay and Groupon. Today, we have investments in companies like Allbirds, the shoe company, Everlane, the clothing brand, Modern Fertility in the healthcare space, General Assembly in the education space, Imperfect Foods in the food e-commerce space, and many, many more.